Hello, everyone. My name is Avery Garza. I'm a marketing communications major and a senior here at Hendrix, and I'd like to welcome you all to an evening with Hendrix's creative writing faculty. This is a night I have been lovingly referring to as Faculty Garden. For those of you who are familiar with Word Garden, and I hope everyone is, I apologize, but there will not be a game this time, but instead I'd like to invite everyone to join us for a reception and a book signing in the Trishman Gallery just outside. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to the Hendrix Murphy Foundation for sponsoring this event and to our featured authors for taking the time to be here tonight. All three of tonight's readers, Hope Coulter, Jessica Jacobs, and Ty Jager, have also all been selected to be included on the Reader's Map of Arkansas, which will be officially released on April 12th. The Reader's Map is a beautifully redesigned and thoughtfully developed literary map of Arkansas that was originally published as a part of the Lost Roads Project in 1994. The Reader's Map of Arkansas works to recognize and honor authors of all genres and eras who have a meaningful connection to the state and have, like our readers tonight, added something beautiful and impactful to the literary climate of Arkansas. And now, to introduce our first reader, I would like to turn the mic over to Anusha Jawani.
Hi everyone, my name is Anusha Jawani, and it is my pleasure to introduce Hope Coulter tonight. Many of you know Hope as the director of the Hendrix Murphy Programs in Literature and Language and as a creative writing professor here at Hendrix. Hope is a native of Louisiana and has earned her AB at Harvard University and her MFA at Queen's University of Charlotte. A novelist and poet, Hope's work has appeared in many journals, and she is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including but not limited to the 2014 Lehman Library Writers' Workshop, 2 Pushcart nominations, and Arkansas's Porter Prize for Literary Excellence. She's published 2 novels, as well as a children's picture book. And in 2015, Hope published her first collection of poetry entitled The Wheel of Light. But what you may not know, and what I desire to convey to you tonight, is that Hope Coulter is an avid bird watcher, a mother of 3, a thoughtful friend, a dog lover, and an eager traveler. But even if you did not know this before tonight, you would encounter all of these qualities in Hope's poems. Students are often taught that good creative writing stands alone, that the context from which it emerges is not necessary to understand it sufficiently. This is both true and false of Hope's poems. For those who do not know Hope personally, The Wheel of Light offers a lens through which they can carefully freeze life's most ordinary moments and step by step find solace in her guidance. But for those who do know Hope, the experience of reading her poems will be amplified because they will see how Hope's desires, struggles, and questions are illuminated in her poetry. Hope shares with us a world in which nothing exists in isolation, especially not nature. The currents of the ocean bring together mother and daughter. The memory of a cicada shell becomes the last gift of a dying brother. A disappointing meteor shower echoes the feeling of desolation in the mind of a lover. Time and place are not constraints for Hope, but concepts she avidly engages with, transporting us from the nuns she sees outside a New York City subway to the tree swing her grandfather built her in rural Louisiana, and from the birth and development of her children to the death of her brother and father. Hope believes that art with intention is a tribute to the world, and necessary because we are all one of the partially blind. By far, the best part about reading your professor's work is seeing how truly she meant everything she ever taught you in the classroom. Hope has a keen devotion to the differences between the various dashes. So keen, in fact, that her students received a 10-minute lesson on the differences between M and N dashes, and an email with the subject heading, "Everything you wanted to know about N dashes but were too afraid to ask." It is a privilege to witness Hope's passion for the minute intricacies of language, her tendency to cradle chosen words, and her graceful encapsulations of human emotion as they manifest themselves into her own creation. The Wheel of Light is Hope's life's work, and similar to her own life, is filled with moments of introspection, clarity, and light. Please join me in welcoming Hope Coulter.
Thanks, Anusha. What a wonderful introduction. I feel it's all downhill from here. I will now begin my lecture on N-dashes. It really is an honor to be here tonight on this stage where so many wonderful writers have read, courtesy of the Hendricks Murphy Foundation and of Hendricks College. I'm very honored and humbled to be here and to be reading with Ty and Jessica. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I'm pleased to see so many good friends, students, former students in the audience, and I very much appreciate your coming. I thought I would talk tonight about the structure of the Wheel of Light and just give you a little sampling of poems in each section, sort of a tasting platter of the book. The book's organized into 3 sections: First Things, Close, and Open. Close and open come from a line in the last poem in the book, which describes monarch butterflies' wings. First Things is one long poem. It's a tribute to my friend Gregor Goethals, an artist and theologian. Gregor's the artist who designed the cover art for the book. She was a dear family friend. Oddly enough, she went to college with my mother at LSU. She was not like my mother's other friends. Anyway, she had left LSU and did further education at Harvard Divinity School and at Yale School of Art, and she taught at Rhode Island School of Design for her career. So she was the only family friend that we had in Cambridge, Massachusetts when I went there for college, and so she took very seriously this charge to look after me when I was in college, which there are many stories about how well that worked out. She was a very dear person. We became good friends, and she was my mentor. Even though she was a visual artist, she was my mentor in some ways in writing. Gregor died in 2008, and I knew I wanted to write about her, but I had to figure out how and what genre. There were a lot of stories I could tell about her and her obsession with dogs. Funny stories. I thought I could do a short story or an essay, but I really wanted to write poetry about her because she had always encouraged my poetry. Even in the years when I was writing more prose, she would press me. She's a very pressing, urgent person. She would, what about your poetry? What about your poetry? So I wanted to write a poem about her. I was pondering how to do this, and I was actually watching some YouTube videos about John Rutter. He was describing the composition of his Requiem, which I was singing in at the time, and it suddenly came to me that I wanted to write this poem about Gregor in 7 sections corresponding to the 7 days of creation in the Genesis myth, because I knew I wanted to talk about her artistic creativity that was central to her life, and she loved nature as well, and so I wanted to talk about creation. So then I had it. I would write it in 7 parts, and I could even tuck in some of the anecdotes and vignettes about her that I wanted to tell. The poem describes the first minutes of her day. The artist, who's the central figure in the poem, who is fashioned on Gregor. She had retired to Sonoma, California, and had a tiny studio there, and she loved to get up early in the morning and work on her art. So as the world comes into view for her, the world is really recreated as it is for us every day. So there's a sort of miniature cosmogony that happens in the poem. In each section, there's something that corresponds to the element that was created on that day in the Genesis story. So I'd like to read to you from section 3, which corresponds to day 3 of creation, where the plants appear and are differentiated. Artist Morning, section 3. Under the artist's hand, her fingers bunched around the brush, extends the first tendril of a line. Oh, primeval magic, this white page, from which will grow the contours, forms that leap to quicken recognition in the eye, beholding eye. The smell of coffee reaches her, the dog wants letting out. Beyond the windows, earth has risen now in terraces, bluffs, and valleys, its sandstone outcrops ochre and dove gray. She thinks of the mural she's designing, of stone tesserae somewhere being quarried and sliced from rock like this, mosaic tiles to be selected and arranged into a whorl just forming in her mind. She opens the door, the dog springs out, and in flows morning, moist and cool, manzanita and pinon, red bark madrone and rose, grapevines, peppers, and mint, spicy rosins on the breeze, exhaled by a million leaves. She stands and breathes them in, then turns to the refrigerator. Within, layered 10 deep in clear drawers, lie small black canisters of film. Pods where seeds of color sleep, coiled and packeted, awaiting the kickstart of light. On the shelves above, there's mustard, 3 bottles of beer, part of a stick of butter. She hangs in the open door. What was she after? Oh, mute flame of orange, a splash in the glass. Pulp and sugar, cold tang, wet on her throat while she returns to the threshold. The hillside radiant now, the dog nowhere in sight. And there was color. The second section is called Close, and the reference to close and then open are in part to lives, to phases of life, to relationships that close and open, and also to physical things like eyes and wings and camera apertures that close and open. My students and I have been talking a lot about elegies this spring in anticipation of Kevin Young's visit on April 14th. We're reading his book, The Book of Hours. So I do urge you to come back and hear Kevin in 6 weeks. Oh man, advertising just pops up everywhere nowadays, I'm sorry. There are several elegies in my book as well. I'll read one. This is one that Anusha mentioned. My brother Thomas died in August 2005 in New Orleans, right before Katrina struck. Breath. It was only coincidence that you died in New Orleans 2 days before the great storm. You'd been airlifted to a place that would help you respire. Respire, air, lifted. What beautiful words. Your lungs had quit working. Up and down the rows of the orchards you'd driven your tractor and walked, if walking on air. The thick, moist air that soon you wouldn't be able to breathe, into which you would rise, inspecting the foliage, teeth clamped around a cigar. Your trees ate light, made leaves and budded, filled out like your daughters, approaching the slope of their prime. How happy you'd been that spring, applying the mists and fogs to combat this fungus, that blight, smoking, breathing, eyeing the long ordered rows until, like a mild cold, it started, a virus, something wrong with you who'd never been sick, who'd been to the hospital only for accidents, slip of the grafting knife, lunge by a dog in labor that left you short 2 fingertips and with a twist to your smile, but breathing. How could it be that now you had to be flown over swamps and levees to the tower of intensive care, to this place that would save you? Mom said to me, the hospital where you were born, where I took my first breath. I know, I said, stop it, stop, that's just a coincidence, dreading some awful symmetry. Not only lives, but relationships come to a close, and so does every phase of life. So another one from this same section is about someone inside a place that's beautiful but also almost enchanted, sort of maze-like, and the speaker in the poem is trying to feel her way out, leaving the museum. It's nearly closing time, and the entrances that invited me, door after door, declined to present themselves as exits. I wander through the galleries upstairs. Monet's haystack glows by a physics all its own, and Degas' little dancer squares her chin toward all the darks and lightenings to come. Downstairs, chairs and china stand in order. French doors, half open and fluttering muslin, beckon me into a courtyard of tables. Crumpled napkins, plates with crumbs, white chairs pushed back, but no one's there. Only a trapped sky, chucking rain a little absently, only this place, enchanted and enclosed. I turn back the way I came, and as in a storybook, a passageway unfolds to lead me out. On the avenue, the Indian on horseback casts himself open to God. I catch the trolley among children, wet and brushy-haired, who mount the steps and laugh at every lurch, protected by their teacher's outstretched arms, then pass at Park Street to another car. Below the common, the passageway is dark, smelling of urine and the hot breath of trains. In white habits and sensible shoes, 2 nuns loiter on the platform. One leans out slightly, peering down the tunnel. The other might be praying for my favor. Finally, in Open, a section where things get a little happier than that, I'll read a poem that concerns issues of form. This, too, is something that I've been taken up with my poetry students this semester, as I do every time I teach the class. This poem is inspired in part by one of my favorite poems. It's Yeats's Lake Isle of Innisfree. I think it's fun for all of us to imagine our fantasy getaway place. Where would it be? Where is that sanctuary, that beautiful spot that you would want to escape to when things are really getting to you, and when you, maybe say toward the beginning of spring break, for instance, when you really feel the need to go to a sanctuary, a haven, a refuge. For Yeats, this was a little cabin with beehives and a little bean garden by it, and he describes in his truly great poem why it lures him and what it does for him. So my corresponding sanctuary would be a beach cottage, where I would imagine life would be simple and free, and I could write, and I would have only a dog with me to share company. And so the poem starts out riffing on this sort of fantasy, but as the poem goes on in this perfectly ordered series of rhyming couplets, there's a surge of restlessness that comes, and it's not quite enough, which is a suspicion I have in my interior life, that as much as I think I would like that perfect withdrawal into hermetic solitude, I actually kind of miss the mess and being embroiled in human relationships. So as the poem realizes that, it fights with its own form and tosses off the rhyme and meter for a few lines as it moves toward closure. Anyway, it's sort of an odd poem, and in the way that it handles form, and I'll let my students tell me tomorrow what they think of it. Restless at Innisfree. A wooden cottage by the shore, a cotton throw rug on the floor, a shaker bed, a chair, a dress or two hung on a peg or less, a cup and plate upon the shelf, no one to answer but myself, a table where I sit to write and lay my supper every night. Into new light I raise my head, have coffee, juice, and homemade bread, and call my dog and walk the beach in quietness, and never breach this simple contemplative rule, a Benedictine woman's school at which I curb my veering heart and rein my wild dreams into art. The days draw out, not long but deep. In solar calm my soul can steep. In solitude I spend the hours, bending all my vision's powers into a gaze that tries to see a rock, a bone, charred memory, a jar of flowers on the sill. With all this, why can't I be still? Because at night, when the lights go out and the dog sighs, the wind gusts, lonely. Because when high waves pound the beach, there's a catch underneath their slow 1-2. The night uncoils a certain turmoil with me in my bed at its heart. Art's calm is long shot, and I'm shot through with longings. The spareness of these rooms is only hollow, bones of my hours in their marrow, sorrow. From my cell goes out, half laugh, half cry. Come, interrupt, intrude, disturb, reply. Thank you.
The week following the UFO cult suicide, a TV news report chronicled their last days, their travels and spending sprees, their last supper of turkey pot pies and cheesecake with blueberries. With my parents, I watched the clips of their Earth exit videos. The sales video was shown last. When she identified herself as Stogie, my mother said, "What a horrible name for such a beautiful girl." My father said, "Will someone please tell me if any of this is real?" On the video, Estelle is seated in front of tall trees, birds sing. In the concluding moments, she pauses. She looks directly into the camera lens and says, "Ta-da!" She laughs. She says, "Cut. Is that a wrap?" I remember the last words she said to me. She said, "How can I turn down the opportunity to advance to the next level?"
Hi, I'm Allie Baer.
I'm Kate Engler.
And so he may not know this, actually, I realized, but Ty Jager was the first professor, Hendricks professor, that I met upon my arrival as a freshman. He was my assigned advisor, as I was a excited but very confused freshman who thought maybe I would major in English. Turned out I didn't major in English, but I kept Ty as my advisor for nearly 3 years. And so the reason being is that he's a wonderful advisor. And I have such fond memories of long advisor-advisee meetings in his office where I would come in so excited with a new class or a new discipline or a new thought about what I might do with my Hendricks career. And he would first get really excited with me, and so that was always really gratifying. And then he would sort of steer our conversation into something very intellectual and really help me find a direction into which to put my passions. And so that culminated in my own interdisciplinary major, which he was so helpful in. And I give sort of this anecdote to say that I can't think of a better example of a person who so embodies the liberal arts, not only as a fantastic writer and professor, but also in my case, as a mentor. And so I was so excited when he approached Kate and I earlier this year about a collaboration.
So Ty approached us at the beginning of the year to tell us his idea about making a book trailer for his upcoming short story collection. And we were so excited and honored to be able to work with him on this project, as neither of us had ever done any sort of collaborative work before. And it was such a learning experience in that for the first time I was working with Allie, but with somebody else too, and like crossing disciplines and like having to find ways to bounce ideas back and forth and like work through, you know, every idea that like when you're working on your own, you can just make a decision on. And Ty made this process like a really enjoyable one. And I feel like I learned so much, and I've never been his student officially, but through this experience I learned an incredibly large amount. I think our biggest struggle was trying to figure out how to condense or express the idea of a collection and such a multitude of strong protagonists in such a short video, which is when we came up with the idea, or the motif of the mask. Ty's wife, Julie, actually made most of these masks, and I was so joyous to be able to work with them because they're so beautiful and unique. I want to just also really thank Jackie for allowing us to use her music, because for so long her music has been some of the most beautiful I've ever heard and has brought tears to my eyes so many times, and being able to use that in a project of my own and a collaboration I'm working on was just so exciting.
And so I think the process and the finished product of this video that we made in our time with Ty is such a good semblance of his ability to bring disciplines together, and something that I'm so impressed by with him. I mean, we have a mask maker and a musician and 2 film students and himself a writer come together with this really enjoyable collaboration. It was enjoyable to make. I hope it was enjoyable for you as well. And now we're going to hear from So Many True Believers. And this is Ty's second book, following his breathtaking cross-genre novella, The Runaway Note. And these 2 works precede his first novel, Radio El Dorado, scheduled to become available to us, his readers, in 2017. So get excited for that. But for now, settle in and prepare to briefly inhabit together the world of So Many True Believers, as Ty constructs for us the elements that fill and become this world, reading from his seductively fraught new collection. Thank you. Ty Jaeger.
Thanks, Kate and Allie. Can we give them a hand for making the toilet open? So it's really great to be reading with Hope and Jessica. And as Kate and Allie said, it's really great to collaborate, to work with other artists, to learn from other artists. And so, you know, it's great to have this opportunity to read to you all. The story I'm going to read tonight is about a person who's not so good at collaboration at all. It's a story that I didn't steal from another writer, but I stole the structure, which I encourage my students to do frequently. Maybe some of you know a Barry Hannah story by the name of Green Gets It. I adopted the structure for this story that I had been writing from Green Gets It. And just as an FYI, it oscillates between points of view. So parts of it are third person, parts of it are first person. It's about that same awful character. Usually around this time of night, I have just finished reading a bedtime story to my daughter, and since I wasn't able to do that this evening, I'm going to dedicate this reading to her, to Ursula. I don't think there's anything else you need to know. This is called To Thy Speed Add Wings. As was his practice of 2 months, at precisely 10 a.m., Donald Moda shuffled across the false balcony that stretched across the second floor of his mansion. He was dressed, as always, in khaki shirt and pants, accessorized with a silk ascot. His intent was to observe his accountant, Joni, while she used the toilet during her coffee break. Donald lived on the 3rd floor, and the 1st and 2nd floors had been renovated into offices and classrooms of the institution of higher learning that he had founded. The sandstone was February cold against the paper of his 85-year-old skin. 2 months prior, his wife had died, leaving him lonely and lustful, despite his equipment not having been fully functional for a decade. No matter. Sometime around Watergate, his wife had replaced his apparatus with an electric back and foot massager. Such were the ways of progress. Donald stretched until he was peering from the side of the window and could see Joni pulling up her skirt and sitting upon the commode. Those cigarettes had given Joni's face the texture and color of an overripe cantaloupe. Her hair was wavy and lustrous. When Joni and Donald studied the account and ledgers, he would lean over her shoulder, yearning to lose himself, louse-like, in her bouffant. He had founded the Nat Moda School in 1969, naming it after his father. For over 2 decades, the pencil pushers at the IRS had kept a careful tally of his tax indiscretions. But near the turn of the century, he had the sense and good fortune to hire Joni. The IRS hadn't knocked on his door in 15 years. Having too much respect for Joni's artful manipulation of numbers, he had never attempted to lay a hand on her. Donald watched as Joni turned away to reach for the toilet paper, one cheek lifting from the seat to reveal the soft white curd of her derriere. He loosed his grip on the railing and in benediction touched a single finger, first to his silk ascot and then to the window pane. Such woe. Donald Moda, a man without friend to whom he was not also employer. In that bittersweet moment, Donald heard what he thought was machine gun fire, and he lost his balance. He toppled over the railing, but not before locking eyes with Joni, her face holed in a scream. Falling 2 stories, he batted the air uselessly, attempting to cling to Joni's siren sound, which happened to be percussed by the rat-a-tat-tat of a woodpecker beating its mating call against a rain gutter. Thank God, he thought, this fall is not long enough for my life to flash before my eyes. I devoted everything to my country and to education, and now I'm reduced to a voyeur, a peeping Tom, and a clumsy one at that. Young and virile, I shipped to Korea with the 2nd Infantry Division, Sergeant Donald Moda. When the 2nd was decimated by the Chinese near Kunuri, I was hit by shrapnel and came to without my squad, my socks, or my boots. I hid and scurried for days, a rat on 2 bloodied paws. The sun rising on the Kechon River, I stumbled upon a sleeping giant of a Korean soldier. With a rock the size of a softball, I brained him dead. 8 minutes later, medics from the 2nd found me 50 yards from my kill, sitting behind a tree and lacing my stolen boots. Only when I realized that I had been in UN territory the entire time and that I had killed to obtain shoes that I wore for less than an hour did I feel regret. I returned to Fort Logan and trained recruits to hate the enemy. Not a hard task. You just show them the right way to look into a mirror. Nightly, the Korean giant would visit me in my dreams, whispering sweet nothings, kunuri, kunuri. This falling seems tedious, Donald thought. Joni's scream echoed across the campus. When he hit the spruce hedges below the false balcony, the air went out of him. He remembered his wife, Anita, dying. Her white eyes yellowed and tired, and he thought, good God, I'm still breathing. The early 60s had offered nothing but promise, and we were filled with the verve to milk it. After the war, I had taken a speed reading class with famed Mormon Evelyn Wood. I wanted to know everything. I became a concert promoter. I got the Beatles to Red Rocks in '64 and later booked Led Zeppelin's first American show. I didn't so much favor the music as I did the profits and power of mass appeal. Anita drove drag races, funny cars out at Bandimere Speedway. Hers a turquoise GTO she christened Gypsy. She was the most eligible bachelorette in the Rocky Mountain region, and grown men would do backflips just to see her bat an eyelid. I drove a '58 Maserati, the fastest car on the Valley Highway, and I was liberal with Father's money. Before I proposed, Anita and I sat in front of the fireplace, and she watched me read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged in 3 hours. I wanted to show her that I was capable of deep thoughts. The wedding took place in my Cadillac at 125 miles an hour, the minister and witnesses in the back seat. Sitting on my lap, Anita steered while we blasted Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass at such a high volume that we needed to scream our vows, and even then our promises went unheard. Anita hit the national drag racing circuit. Her pit crew was untouchable. After winning the Rocky Flats Cup, Anita sprayed champagne on the boys, a wry smile on her face. Her humor was not lost on me. Axel Maxime, a Frenchman who was her lead mechanic, sidled up close to me and whispered, "With Anita, it's like swimming, no?" He sniffed his grease-stained fingers and raised his eyebrows. He wore an impeccably groomed mustache. "Back to France with you, grease monkey," I said. I might have punched him had he not had the advantage of superior strength. With Anita, the smell of gasolines and burning tire rubber were aphrodisiacs. Riding her from behind one Easter morning, I spied smudged handprints on her hips. I slowed my pace and said, "Did you disgrace our marriage bed with a member of your pit crew?" "Harder," she cried, slapping at me. "With a wrench-head frog-eater? You spend all your time at concert halls," she said, "schmoozing in the green room with groupies and hippies. When you come home, all you want to do is read." I had terrible insomnia in those days, and exercise only made it worse. "True," I said, "but I have never strayed." She pretended not to hear. She was insatiable. I was beyond release. After a week of spying and scheming, I knew Maxime's routine, that every morning he jogged a particular country road. At daybreak, I drove the Maserati to that very location and ran him over dead. I buried him in an abandoned silver mine on one of Father's properties. And then, wearing Anita's crash helmet, I piloted the Maserati straight into a mud and rock-filled ditch. I totaled my beloved. But all the evidential mess of blood and hair was vanished into the ground. Anita hired other mechanics, but no one had Maxime's touch. I felt no pride in the thing, no sense that honor had been restored. Maxime had given my wife the thing she wanted most, the glory of speed, and I took it away in a jealous panic. She never suspected a thing. And in our marriage bed, we were active, though mournful. She soon gave birth to a son she named Ryan. The first time I saw his face, I knew he was not my seed. I had killed Maxime, and 9 months later, Anita had resurrected him. Donald woke in a blanket of pain and haze, his left arm in a cast. He reached with his right to feel where his aching head should have been and found nothing but gauze and tape. It was not the first time he had awoken in the hospital. In the last 10 years, he had had 2 heart attacks, a seizure while swimming laps, and just before Anita died of pancreatic cancer, he suffered a stroke that left half his face looking underinflated. At what point exactly had his body committed mutiny? To hell with it, he thought. To the light, Donald. Go to the light. Forget this mortal coil. It's double toil and trouble. Mr. Moda, can you hear me? My head is killing me. You had a nasty fall, sir. It all came rushing back to him, the curve of Joni's posterior, the machine gun report of the woodpecker's beak, Joni's anguished scream. He fell back to his pillow and bellowed. You can thank your lucky stars for the shrubbery, the nurse said. Lucky stars? I should have had those things removed years ago, Donald said. Your daughters were here earlier, sir. Add insult to injury, Donald said. He and Anita had 6 daughters, each dumber and meaner than the last. The boy Anita conceived with Maxime was the only child to amount to anything. He was in real estate and horses. Hitting the morphine drip, Donald cursed death. Why do you come so slowly, ravaging my body piecemeal? Perhaps I should have driven the Maserati off the cliff rather than run down old Maxime. Done with it, with one resolute foot to the floor. In the spring of '69, Father demanded that I get out of the concert promotion business. The old man knew his stuff. He had been a missionary, a rancher, a first-rate capitalist with holdings in oil, minerals, and chemicals. A church or a school, that's the ticket, he said. My tastes were too fast for religion. Seeing that I had been a motivational specialist in the Army, and given my interest in speed reading, a school seemed the proper choice. I drove to Salt Lake City and consulted with Evelyn Wood. We shared a desire to change the world for the better. Her motivation came from pure generosity, mine from guilt. I returned to Denver, and for my final gig, I promoted the Denver Pop Festival, which featured Jimi Hendrix playing for the last time with The Experience. There were clashes between the police and so-called peace activists, tear gas, rocks, bottles. Flower power had run its course and withered on the vine. The spring of 1970, radical leftists abducted Father from the mansion. They hadn't expected Anita to be in the house, so they bound her to an oversized Remington replica Father had sitting in the garden. Before they left, they kicked her a couple of times and proceeded to say unpleasant things about her anatomy and her social class. They asked for a ridiculous ransom that we refused to pay, and they gunned down father while he sat upon the toilet, crapped on the crapper at the ripe old age of 90. I was a wreck, hungover by day, blind drunk by night. The whole mess skewed my judgment. With a slice of my inheritance, I bought Anita and myself matching gold Maserati Ghibli SS coupes. I had visions of a street racing away our pain. Anita, traumatized, soon quit drag racing and got hired at UPS as a delivery driver. While she looked good in the shorts, it was obvious that she had lost her fire. She cut her hair short and spent her time packing the children's lunch boxes and nodding herself mindless with macrame projects. She lost interest in all matters carnal, and she developed what Donald thought was an unhealthy interest in her son. In 1976, while at a speed reading conference in Abilene, Kansas, Evelyn Wood and I toured the Eisenhower Library. Granted special access to the archives, we read feverishly. Although she was 67, nearly 20 years my senior, she enchanted me. We made love beneath Ike's portrait, and what I initially thought was Evelyn's climax was actually a stroke. I feared for her life and hollered for help. Security arrived before I had the chance to find her panties or pull up my pants. It was in all the papers. They kicked poor Evelyn out of the Tabernacle Choir. Though the stroke did such damage, I don't think she was much for singing. Evelyn's husband filed a lawsuit claiming that I stole their speed reading techniques. They won a pittance. Anita discovered my transgressions while checking out at the supermarket and perusing the tabloids. She demanded a second house in Golden. Even when we slept under the same roof, we kept separate beds. Publicly shamed, I had no one to whom I needed to answer. I devoted all of my time to the school. I was a parasite upon my dead father's fortune. One night, after I burned a fish dinner for one, I called Anita. I said, I know the secret you've been keeping. I see Maxime's Frenchy features in the boy's face. She said, I would divorce you if I did not think it was the very thing you desired. It was not my desire, dearest. Does this mean I won? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shelby. I'm really excited to get to introduce you to the last reader tonight, Jessica Jacobs. So in class once, Jessica told us, you become a poet when you declare yourself one. She made all of us do it and took part in our naming ceremony as we tried out the word with careful tongues, as though we were learning another language, one with a certain kind of authority and a concrete tangibility that's frightening to liberal arts students. When it was her turn, Jessica was almost as tentative as us. She said she was a poet as though it were news, as though she, too, was declaring herself for the first time. I remember that we laughed, because there had never really existed a time when we knew Jessica and thought of her as anything but a poet. I don't know that I can tell you exactly why that is, but it might have something to do with her extreme capacity for empathy, or the way she pays attention to the world, or maybe the way she tells you about it. Jessica holds an MFA from Purdue University and a BA from Smith. She's been published all over, from the Oxford American to the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, mouthful. She and her wife, Nicole Brown, both serve as faculty at writing workshops in Greece, and of course, Jessica is the 2016 Hendrix Murphy Writer in Residence. Her first collection, Pelvis with Distance, a biography and poems about Georgia O'Keeffe, was released last April. The collection has been reviewed in The Rumpus and O Magazine, among others, and received the 2015 New Mexico Book Award. When the book came out, my classmates and I grabbed for copies and then sank down into those poems. When we reemerged, all we could talk about was how this work had transformed lives that were not our own into experiences and memories that we could call our own. Jessica's work is like that. There's something behind the words, or maybe infused in them, that requires your attention not only to the story she's telling, but also to your own entire catalog of human memory. Her poems might explain experiences you've never had, but they ring with familiarity, with something that feels right. We come away from Jessica's work more awake to the world and ourselves and how those two combine. Jessica's poems cannot help but remind those of us lucky enough to know her of how Jessica chooses to be a human in this world. That is, kind, strong, compassionate, overwhelmingly understanding. Somehow she handles words and people in similar ways, with care. Honestly, though, she's probably cringing in the audience right now because were I to use any of these abstractions in class, she'd get very frustrated about my lack of specificity. So let me try again. These are lines from her poems, but she does this in life and on the page. Jessica pushes us to recognize that inherent in brokenness is breaking open, the ability to hold more than one whole. And she asks us to listen for and track down the whispery tintinnabulation of distant bells. In the poems she's about to read, Jessica makes herself vulnerable in ways that cut to the core of what it is to be human. Her poems shine light on what we've been through and what we might go through, and the way that looks from the inside. She doesn't spare anything, and we, as readers and listeners, are so much the better for it. Though she may still hesitate to say it herself, Jessica Jacobs is a poet, and please welcome Jessica to the stage.
Shelby, you are also a poet. I hope you all know that. Thank you. Ty and Hope, it's just such a pleasure to hear you read. And I owe the two of you and Sarah and Henrietta and my colleagues in the English department just so much thanks for making me feel so at home at Hendrix. This is truly one of the best experiences of my professional career and personally too, so thank you. And to the majority of you out in the audience, to you students with whom I have had the joy of working. Writing these new poems that I'm going to be reading, poems that are very personal, most of which deal with my marriage. It was difficult often, as you all know from when you do your own personal writing, and pretty consistently terrifying. But again and again over the last 3 years, I have watched so many of you write about the things that frighten you most with such beauty and power and grace. And watching that has taught me so much about how to be brave. So thank you for your help in writing these poems. A question to ask, oh, stand back a little bit there. A question to ask once the honeymoon is over. Big around as my bike helmet and high as my ankle. The box turtle was halfway from my side of the road to the other. The warm sun felt delicious, my legs strong. It was almost to the center line. I hadn't been passed by a car for miles. Figuring if it was still there, I'd pick it up on the way back. I cycled past. Years before, the woman across the street was shaped like that turtle, or more like a toadstool, really, squat bell of a body atop the thin stalks of her legs, milky and bare beneath her frayed black house dress. It hurt her to move, clear even from my second-story window. So she brought her trash out in increments, in small bursting grocery bags. She tossed each out the door onto the porch, then nudged them one step to the next before easing carefully, painfully, herself down, a step at a time. Then she towed them finally, slowly, slowly, into a crumpled heap at the curb. I left my window to help, then took her trash out every week after. That story, I hadn't yet told it to my wife, had I? But there was the turnaround, quicker than expected, and I spun to find a beat-down bus trailed by all the fuming cars that hadn't passed me. Steadying my handlebars into the wind, I rode back hard, zigging around crushed squirrels and tire-splayed birds. The turtle was just where I'd left it, but with the top of its shell torn away. The dead turtle, a raw red bowl, its blood slashing the twinned yellow lines into an unequal sign, as in, thinking about doing the right thing is not the same as doing it. As in, how many times did I watch that old woman shuffle bags down the stairs? Really, how many? Before I went from watching to helping. As in, with my wife beside me, I am the woman who does not hesitate to lay down my bike and give a small life safe passage. As in, I biked slowly home, told no one. As in, will she love me less when she learns I am not equal to the person I am when she is watching? In the first fall of our marriage, though I want to give you only kindness, there's often an age between what I want and who I am. Yet how many times can you cry on my chest before something good grows there? Redwoods thrive in acid soil. Summon that weight, those stiff-fingered roots to skewer my ribs and prime the rusted pump in my chest. Into that age, let me grow, a ring for each year, marking boom and drought and flood. Let me anchor further into your roots, make me part of something greater. Let me grow strong enough that even when fallen, I can be of use to you. Rough lumber for rafters and joists, a roof for the drum of this evening's insistent rain. A cross-section from my trunk set to spin on the phonograph, a record of what has passed, playing the music of what is to come. A song for each year I'll learn to love you better. We're going to stay dark and go darker, and then we'll end in light. So brace yourself, and I promise. So my wife, Nicole, and I had the crazy good fortune to have our books come out at the same time last spring. And what this meant was we got to do something that, just most people never get to do. We got to take this 6-month cross-country book tour together. We drove over 10,000 miles, and it was so much fun. Nicole fell in love with an emu named Nigel. I fell in love with a camel. And it was great. But we can talk about that at the reception. But we were so tired. We were so tired by the end of it, and we were so ready to come back to Arkansas. But on the very last stop of the tour, she was walking up a set of stairs and noticed something strange in her leg, which turned out to be a tumor. So This is an excerpt from a longer sequence of poems about the months of doctor's visits and tests and waiting that followed. In the days between detection and diagnosis, what if this ultrasound of my wife, which shows this something growing inside her, this mass punctuating the undulation of her thigh, is the closest we come to birth, this tumor the most her body conceives. If God is love, said Jean Vanier, it means he's vulnerable, which makes me permeable as a sheer curtain, letting all the light out and in, lifting, falling with whatever drafts leak past the pain. I wish I were someone who prayed. I wish I had the words or someone to say them to. I write of my love for her and never come close to naming it. So what word can claim God? False idols, crude cages, within words, God is electricity bucking in a bad breaker. So instead, via negativa. Just as it's easier to sketch the space around a tree than the tree itself, God is described by what God is not. And what a relief. The open-air sanctuary of apophatic prayer, built from the Greek apo, away from, and phanai, to speak, away from speech, the reprieve of unsaying, of clearing a space in which God can appear. Not of creation, God is not divisible. Literally, God is not, because God transcends being. Enough of these bricks of negation, and we can babble a tower tall enough to make not a prison, not a house, but an instrument through which Shekinah, the presence of God, can sound. I cannot say what I believe, but I am listening. So we ended up going down to MD Anderson in Houston for testing, and while we were there, we visited the Rothko Chapel, which I highly recommend you all make a trip to. It's this simple, large room whose walls are lined with massive, just stunning abstract paintings by the American artist Mark Rothko. We drive hours south in search of better care. Between appointments, after days of rain, every step I run is a slickness threatening skid. Every step lichen and leaf rot. We retreat inside the Rothko Chapel, its paintings lit by what the sky provides. They change as the weather does, as the days tick down. In the hospital, patients starting chemo are identifiable by only a white bracelet. Later, after the closely dosed poison shears them of shielding hair or beard, makes tallow of their skin, makes their pulses flicker dimly, no bracelets are needed. Here, a constellation of these women in headscarves, an array of faulty, defiant lamps. I kiss the back of her neck, its sun and sweat the brightest shade in the room. then go sit closer to a canvas to cry alone. When I turn, she is watching my shoulders. She dips her head, walks outside. In my first real stillness in weeks, I begin with negation, a prayer of no, of not yet, of all the things I cannot bear to happen. Then simply, please. Which binds this to how many moments of spontaneous devastation. The inhalation as I began our marriage vows, the last mile of my first marathon, the night I stood on that ice field in Wyoming and lost track of my edges. Moments the world broke through, or more so, that what barricades me from the world was broken. A small window opened, like the single painting on the entrance wall, a massive black rectangle framed in maroon. A window of darkness into deeper darkness. No real promise of eventual light. Only an opening, which we'll have to do. Please, you cold slate tiles. Please, heavy benches with your clear shellac. Baffled skylight, letting the light in, letting my words out. Please, don't take her from me. But everything worked out. Can breathe. The tumor was benign. It was safely removed, thankfully. And for that, I'm going to end with the promise poem of joy. So maybe you'll want to talk to me afterward. All right. Because you waited for me to fly your first kite. Let our love be this clutch of dogs off leash. The preen and posture, snort and snuffle of saying, I smell you and therefore know you. The rolling on the backs and bearing of the bellies and the tails, an exaltation of metronomes, keeping time for their joy. If this summer is a body, let me be its tongue, tasting the green tang of the spittlebug nests, foaming the oatgrass, the iron of this good dirt. A tongue to lick the salt from your upper lip, the rosary of sweat risen on your chest. A tongue to tap the top teeth and suck back like a wave whose tide rolls out through lips pursed as though for a kiss. Listen again. Thank you. As in, thank you, please let me be this kite lifting from your hands. Ruffled nylon paradise bird with its taut spine and crossbar, the pop of its ripstop sails, snap of its translucent tails. Give me the grand view, white water and mountains, but mostly of you. Head thrown back, face to the sun, holding my trace line, tethered always, responding to the slightest tick of your fingertips. Let me be a kite that trusts itself to the sky. Yes, gravity is as inevitable as death, but why let that desecrate even a moment of this flight? Thank you.